They left her with nothing. 3 days later, a dog found what they had spent 50 years trying to hide. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if you believe dogs sometimes understand what people overlook, subscribe and stay with this story until the end. Snow drifted across the empty Montana highway like ash beneath a pale winter sky. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and frozen earth across open land where few travelers passed in winter. On the shoulder of Highway 89, a lonely figure sat wrapped in a worn brown coat, her hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. Margaret Whitmore was 78 years old. Her silver hair peeked out from beneath a knitted hat. Deep lines marked her face, not from age alone, but from years of loving people who had slowly forgotten how to love her back. Beside her sat a single suitcase. Everything she had left fit inside it. A passing truck rushed by without slowing. Then another one. Margaret watched the vehicles disappear into the distance. She had stopped counting the hours. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains, staining the clouds with fading shades of gold and gray. 3 days earlier, she had still believed she had a place in her family. 3 days earlier, she had sat at a kitchen table listening as her son explained why she could no longer stay in his house. He spoke carefully, politely, almost kindly, but the words hurt all the same. Expenses, space, practicality, complications. They sounded practical until she understood they all meant the same thing. There was no room left for her. Margaret had not argued. She simply packed her things. The wedding photograph, a few clothes, a faded Bible, a silver locket she had carried since she was 19. Then she walked away from the only home she had known in nearly 40 years. Now she sat alone beside a highway while daylight slowly disappeared. She should have felt angry. Instead, she felt tired. The kind of tired that settled deep in the bones and refused to leave. The wind strengthened. Margaret pulled her coat tighter. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled above the tree line. The world continued, moving as though nothing had happened. As though an old woman sitting alone beside the road did not matter. She lowered her gaze toward the snow-covered ground and whispered a quiet prayer she was not sure anyone would hear. Lord, if there is somewhere I still belong, please help me find it. The words disappeared into the cold air. Minutes passed. Then something unexpected happened. Headlights appeared beyond the bend in the road. Unlike the other vehicles, this truck slowed. Margaret looked up. The dark pickup approached carefully before continuing past her. For a moment, she thought it would disappear like all the others. Instead, the brake lights glowed red. The truck rolled to a stop nearly 200 yards ahead. A door opened, and a tall man stepped out. Even from a distance, Margaret could see the broad shoulders and steady posture of someone who had spent years in uniform. A German shepherd jumped down beside him. The dog stood perfectly still, staring directly toward her. The man called softly. The dog did not move. He called again. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the German shepherd started running. Not toward the forest. Not toward the road. Toward Margaret. Snow scattered beneath powerful paws as the animal crossed the distance between them. Margaret froze. The dog slowed as he approached. Amber eyes studied her carefully. Not suspicious. Not threatening. Concerned. The German shepherd stopped directly in front of her and sat down. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the dog gently placed his head against her knee. And somewhere far behind him, standing beside the truck beneath the fading Montana sunset, Logan Hayes watched in complete disbelief. Logan Hayes had trusted Ranger in deserts, mountains, forests, and corners of the world most people would never see on a map. The German shepherd had never ignored a command. Not once. Yet now the dog sat beside a stranger on the side of a frozen Montana highway and refused to move. Snow drifted through the fading evening light as Logan walked slowly toward them. His boots crunched against the ice-covered shoulder. The cold air carried the scent of pine, wood smoke, and distant snowfall rolling down from the mountains. Ranger glanced back briefly, acknowledging his handler's approach, then immediately returned his attention to the elderly woman. Logan frowned. That by itself was unusual. Ranger was a working dog, disciplined and focused. He was friendly when appropriate, but he did not form instant attachments. Especially not like this. The old woman looked up as Logan approached. Her blue eyes were tired. Not just from the cold. Tired from life. The kind of exhaustion that settled into a person's heart after too many disappointments. "Ma'am," Logan said gently. Are you all right? The question felt foolish the moment it left his mouth. Of course she was not all right. She was sitting beside a highway in winter with a suitcase and nowhere to go. Yet she managed a faint smile. I suppose that depends on who is asking. Logan found himself smiling despite the situation. Logan Hayes. He extended a gloved hand. And this stubborn dog is Ranger. The old woman looked down at the German Shepherd. Ranger had somehow managed to press even closer against her side. He does not seem stubborn, she said softly. He seems worried. Logan blinked. Few people understood dogs that quickly. You know animals? She nodded. I spent most of my life around them. Her hand moved slowly across Ranger's neck. The German Shepherd closed his eyes. Logan stared. The dog looked more relaxed than he had all week. Something about the scene unsettled him. Not because it felt wrong, because it felt strangely right. What is your name? He asked. Margaret Whitmore. The answer hung in the cold air. Logan noticed the suitcase beside her. It was old, but carefully maintained. A small silver cross hung from the zipper. Everything about it suggested permanence, not travel. Are you waiting for someone? Logan asked. Margaret hesitated. Her gaze drifted toward the highway. Snowflakes settled on her coat. Not anymore. The words carried a weight that required no explanation. Logan looked away for a moment. He understood more than she realized. After leaving the Navy, he had spent years trying to figure out where he belonged. Purpose could disappear faster than people expected. Family sometimes disappeared even faster. Ranger suddenly stood and nudged Margaret's suitcase with his nose. Then he sat again. Logan shook his head. Now he is inspecting luggage. Margaret laughed quietly. It was the first real laugh she had probably had in days. The sound surprised both of them. Darkness was arriving quickly now. The temperature would continue dropping. Logan glanced toward the mountains. A storm was coming. He could feel it. Margaret, he said carefully. There is a diner about 20 miles from here. Warm food. Hot coffee. We can figure things out there. Margaret lowered her eyes. I do not have money. Good thing I was not asking for any. For a moment she said nothing. Then her eyes filled with tears she clearly did not want anyone to see. She turned away slightly and stared across the snow-covered fields. People have been driving past me all day, she whispered. Most did not even slow down. Logan looked at Ranger. The German Shepherd remained beside her, steady and calm. Looks like one of us did. Margaret smiled through her tears and gently scratched behind Ranger's ears. The dog immediately wagged his tail. Logan had seen that expression before. Ranger had chosen this woman. The realization settled over him with unexpected certainty. Then something caught the German Shepherd's attention. His ears lifted. His posture changed. Slowly, he turned his head toward a distant ridge covered in pine trees. A narrow trail disappeared into the darkness beyond it. Ranger stared at it so intensely that Logan followed his gaze. The dog stood. Not nervous. Not alert. Interested. Then, for the second time that evening, Ranger ignored a command and started walking toward the trail. Logan Hayes had seen Ranger track missing hikers through blizzards, locate hidden campsites miles from civilization, and detect danger long before any human noticed it. But this was different. The German Shepherd was not searching for someone. He was following something. A feeling. A memory. A scent too faint for human senses. Snow continued falling as Ranger moved toward the narrow trail, disappearing into the pine-covered ridge. Logan called his name once. The dog slowed, but did not return. Instead, he glanced back briefly as if asking a question. Then he continued forward. Margaret Whitmore watched the scene with quiet amazement. Has he ever done this before? She asked. Logan pulled his jacket tighter against the cold. Not like this. The answer bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Ranger trusted commands. Ranger followed routines. Yet twice in a single evening, the dog had ignored him completely. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the snow. Beyond the ridge, darkness gathered among the trees. The storm was moving faster now. Logan knew they should leave. The diner was still 20 miles away. Margaret needed warmth, food, shelter. Common sense said they should get back in the truck immediately. Then Ranger stopped. The German Shepherd stood frozen near the entrance of the trail, staring into the forest. His ears stood tall. His body was perfectly still. Logan recognized that posture. The dog had found something. Stay here, Logan said gently to Margaret. He followed the trail for nearly 50 yards before reaching Ranger. The forest felt strangely quiet. Snow muffled every sound. Tall pines stretched toward the darkening sky. Then Logan noticed it. Faint tire tracks beneath the fresh snow. Old tracks. Not recent. They led deeper into the woods. Ranger lowered his nose and continued forward. Logan studied the marks carefully. Whoever had driven there had not used the road in a long time. Weeds and brush pushed through parts of the path. Yet the trail clearly led somewhere. He returned to Margaret. There is an old access road back there. Margaret looked toward the trees. Something flickered across her face. Recognition. There used to be ranches in these hills, she said quietly. Logan frowned. Used to. She nodded. Many years ago. Most disappeared. The wind carried the scent of snow and pine between them. Ranger returned and sat beside Margaret once more. Then he did something unexpected. The German shepherd gently nudged her suitcase. Not once. 3 times. Margaret looked down. Her expression changed immediately. Slowly, she knelt beside the old suitcase and opened the front pocket. Logan watched in. Silence. She removed a folded piece of paper yellowed by age. Her hands trembled slightly. I forgot this was here. Logan looked at the document. It appeared to be an old map. The paper had been folded so many times that the creases were nearly worn through. Margaret carefully opened it. The moment she did, her eyes widened. Logan stepped closer. Drawn across the map was a section of land deep within the Montana hills. A property boundary, a stream, a barn, a house, and a name written in faded ink across the top. Willow Creek Ranch. Margaret stared at the words as though she had seen a ghost. Snowflakes landed softly on the map. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. I have not seen this place in 50 years. Logan looked at her. You know it. She swallowed hard. For a long moment, she seemed unable to answer. Then tears appeared in her eyes. Not from sadness. From memory. Someone once promised to take me there. Ranger sat perfectly still beside her. The German shepherd's amber eyes moved between Margaret and the map. Then he lowered his nose to the paper and touched a single location near the center. A small red X hidden among the faded markings. Logan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Because whatever Willow Creek Ranch was, Ranger seemed determined to find it. The name Willow Creek Ranch lingered in the cold evening air like a memory refusing to fade. Margaret Whitmore sat motionless beside the snow-covered road, staring at the old map spread across her lap. The fading daylight painted the paper in shades of blue and silver. Ranger remained beside her, his nose resting near the red X marked at the center of the property. Logan Hayes watched both of them carefully. The wind had strengthened. Snow drifted through the pine trees beyond the ridge. Common sense still told him they should leave before the storm arrived. Yet every instinct he possessed said something important waited at the end of that forgotten road. Margaret traced a finger across the faded lines of the map. Her hand trembled slightly. His handwriting, she whispered. Logan looked down. The small notes scattered along the margins had indeed been written by someone decades earlier. Measurements, directions, dates, tiny observations about fences, water sources, and landmarks. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. Personal. Who made this? Logan asked quietly. Margaret swallowed hard. For a moment she seemed far away, lost somewhere between memory and regret. A man named Thomas Whitaker. The name carried a softness Logan immediately noticed. Not sadness. Not exactly. Something deeper. Ranger lifted his head as if listening. Margaret smiled faintly. He was the love of my life. Snow continued falling around them. Logan remained silent. He had learned long ago that people revealed important truths only when they were ready. Margaret folded the edge of the map carefully. We were supposed to build a life together. Her eyes drifted toward the dark forest. Then everything fell apart. Logan did not ask for details. He did not need to. The sorrow in her voice told enough of the story. Somewhere along the way, life had separated them. Decades had passed. Dreams had disappeared. And now an old map had returned from the bottom of a forgotten suitcase. Ranger suddenly stood. His ears rose. The German shepherd turned toward the forest again. Then, without hesitation, he started down the trail. Logan sighed. There he goes. Margaret laughed quietly. I like him. That makes one of us right now. Yet despite his words, Logan followed. Margaret gathered her suitcase and carefully tucked the map inside her coat. Together, the three of them moved into the trees. The access road wound through the forest like a forgotten ribbon. Snow softened every sound beneath their feet. Pine branches sagged beneath fresh accumulation. The air smelled of cedar, earth, and approaching weather. Ranger moved confidently ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure they were following. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the forest began to thin. Then Logan saw it. At first it appeared only as a silhouette against the darkening sky. A weathered barn, then a fence line, then the outline of a house. Willow Creek Ranch emerged from the storm like something preserved by time itself. Margaret stopped walking. Her breath caught. Logan looked at her. Tears filled her eyes. "It is still here," she whispered. The property sat hidden within a broad valley surrounded by pines and rolling hills. Snow covered the rooftops. Weeds pushed through sections of fencing. Yet despite years of neglect, the ranch remained standing. The sight felt almost impossible. Ranger trotted forward through the open gate. The German shepherd moved with growing excitement now. Logan noticed immediately. The dog was not simply exploring. He seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go. They approached the house slowly. The front porch sagged slightly beneath age and weather. Wind chimes stirred gently beneath the eaves. A faded rocking chair rested near the front door. Everything looked abandoned. Yet something felt strangely alive about the place. Then Ranger stopped. The dog stood perfectly still near the old barn. His nose pointed toward a rusted water tank half buried beneath snow. Logan followed his gaze. The German shepherd's body became rigid with focus. Margaret looked between them. "What is it?" she asked. Logan shook his head slowly. "I do not know." Ranger walked directly to the tank and began pawing at the frozen ground beneath it. Snow scattered in every direction. Then he dug again. And again. Logan felt a chill crawl across his shoulders. Because whatever Ranger had found, he clearly had no intention of leaving it buried. Snow flew beneath Ranger's paws as he dug relentlessly at the frozen ground beside the rusted water tank. The wind howled across the valley, rattling loose boards on the old barn and sending drifts of powder across the ranch yard. Logan Hayes stood a few feet away, watching the German shepherd work with unusual intensity. Ranger was not chasing a scent trail. He was not hunting a small animal beneath the snow. He was focused on a single point with the kind of determination Logan had learned never to ignore. Margaret Whitmore pulled her coat tighter against the cold and stepped closer. Her eyes never left the dog. "He thinks something is there," she said quietly. Logan nodded. "That is exactly what worries me." Ranger dug again. Then again. Snow and frozen dirt scattered in every direction. Finally, his paw struck. Something solid. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Metal. The German shepherd immediately stopped digging and looked back at Logan. His amber eyes were bright with urgency. Logan crouched beside the hole and brushed away the remaining dirt with his gloved hands. Beneath the surface lay a rusted iron ring attached to what appeared to be a steel hatch. For several seconds, no one spoke. The storm seemed to fade into the background. Even the wind felt quieter. Margaret stared at the discovery with wide eyes. "I never knew that was there." Logan gripped the iron ring and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Years of dirt and ice held the hatch firmly in place. He adjusted his footing and tried again. This time the metal shifted slightly with a deep, grinding sound. Ranger stepped backward and sat down. The dog watched every movement closely. Slowly, the hatch lifted open. A rush of cold air escaped from the darkness below. Logan shined his flashlight inside. Narrow wooden steps descended into a hidden underground room. The beam disappeared into shadows. Margaret covered her mouth. "Thomas never told me about this." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Logan looked at her. "You are sure?" She nodded. "We talked about this ranch for years. Every fence, every tree, every dream. He never mentioned anything underground." Ranger stood and carefully approached the opening. The German shepherd lowered his head and sniffed the air. Then, to Logan's surprise, his posture relaxed. Whatever scent had drawn him here did not alarm him. It reassured him. Logan descended first. The wooden stairs creaked beneath his weight. The flashlight beam revealed stone walls and shelves covered in dust. The underground room was larger than expected. It resembled a small archive preserved beneath the ranch for decades. Margaret followed slowly. Tears shimmered in her eyes before she even reached the bottom step. Along one wall stood wooden crates. Along another sat filing cabinets covered in dust. Framed photographs rested on shelves. Old journals lay stacked neatly in boxes. Nothing appeared random. Someone had carefully preserved everything. Then Margaret suddenly froze. Logan turned toward her. The old woman was staring at a photograph hanging near the far wall. Her hand trembled as she approached it. The image showed a younger version of herself standing beside a tall man with kind eyes. They were smiling, happy, hopeful. The years disappeared from her face as she looked at it. "Thomas," she whispered. The room went silent. Logan lowered his flashlight. Ranger walked to Margaret's side and sat beside her. The old woman gently touched the edge of the photograph. Then she noticed something written beneath it. Her breath caught. Logan stepped closer. A handwritten note had been placed inside the frame. The ink had faded slightly, but the words remained clear. "If Margaret ever comes home, show her everything." Logan felt a chill move through him. Not from the cold. From the realization that whoever created this hidden room had been waiting for this exact moment. And somehow, after 50 years, Ranger had found it. Margaret Whitmore stood before the photograph as though the years between then and now had suddenly disappeared. Her fingers lingered against the glass. The young woman smiling beside Thomas Whitaker looked nothing like the weary figure who had been sitting beside a highway only hours earlier. Yet Logan Hayes could see it now. The same eyes, the same quiet warmth, the same stubborn hope. Ranger remained seated beside her, watching silently. The underground room felt almost sacred. Dust floated through the beam of Logan's flashlight. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Carefully labeled boxes filled every corner. Whoever created this hidden archive had done so with extraordinary care. Margaret finally stepped away from the photograph. Tears glistened on her cheeks. "He kept all of this," she whispered. Logan looked around the room. "Looks that way." Her gaze moved across the shelves. Then she froze again. On a nearby table sat a wooden box carved with delicate floral patterns. Margaret immediately recognized it. Logan saw the expression on her face. "What is it?" She slowly approached. Her hand trembled as she touched the lid. "I gave this to Thomas when we were 21. Logan felt a chill. The box looked old. Very old. Yet it had been preserved perfectly. Margaret carefully opened it. Inside rested dozens of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. For several moments, she could not speak. Then she picked up the top envelope. Her name was written across the front. Margaret. The handwriting matched the notes on the map. Thomas. Ranger rose and moved closer. The German shepherd seemed unusually calm, almost content. Logan stepped back, giving Margaret space. She opened the first letter carefully. The paper crackled softly. Her eyes moved across the page. Then another tear slipped down her cheek. "What does it say?" Logan asked gently. Margaret smiled sadly. "He wrote this after I left town." Her voice trembled. "He said he would wait for me." Silence filled the room. The storm continued outside, but beneath the ranch the world felt suspended in time. Margaret opened another letter. Then another one. Dozens of them. Some dated months apart. Some years apart. None had ever been mailed. Each one described the same thing. Thomas's hope that one day she would come back. Logan watched quietly. The story slowly revealed itself through fading ink and yellowed pages. Two young people deeply in love. Circumstances pulling them apart. Years passing. Yet one person refusing to let go. Then Ranger suddenly turned away from the table. His ears lifted. Logan noticed immediately. The German shepherd walked toward a row of filing cabinets at the far end of the room. He stopped beside the lowest drawer and nudged it with his nose. Once. Then again. Logan sighed softly. "You found something else, did you?" He crossed the room and pulled the drawer open. Inside were property records, maps, and legal documents stacked neatly in folders. Most appeared decades old. Then one folder caught his attention. The name on the tab made him pause. Margaret Whitmore. Logan frowned and removed it carefully. Margaret looked up from the letters. "What is it?" He opened the folder. The first page appeared to be a land deed. The second contained legal correspondence. The third contained signatures. Then Logan reached the final page and felt his pulse quicken. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I think you need to see this." She walked toward him slowly. Logan handed her the document. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened. The room went silent again. Because according to the document in her hands, Thomas Whitaker had not simply preserved a ranch for 50 years. He had left the entire property to her. Margaret Whitmore stared at the document as though the words might vanish if she blinked. Her hands trembled so badly that Logan Hayes instinctively reached out to steady the page. The underground room seemed smaller suddenly, quieter. Even the distant sound of wind above the ranch had faded into the background. For several seconds, Margaret could not speak. She simply read the document again. Then again. The deed clearly listed Willow Creek Ranch and the surrounding acreage. Hundreds of acres of land. The house, the barn, the creek, everything. And beneath it sat the signature of Thomas Whitaker. Alongside it was a legal statement declaring that the property would transfer to Margaret Whitmore if she could ever be located. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks now. "He waited for me," she whispered. Logan lowered his gaze. There was something heartbreaking about hearing those words from a woman who had spent years believing she had been forgotten. Ranger quietly rested his head against her leg. The German shepherd seemed to understand that this moment mattered. Margaret reached down and placed a trembling hand on his neck. "Why would he do this?" she asked softly. Logan looked around the room. The answer surrounded them. The letters, the photographs, the journals. 50 years of hope carefully preserved beneath a ranch hidden in the Montana hills. "Because he never stopped loving you," Logan replied. Margaret closed her eyes. The words hurt and healed at the same time. She slowly lowered herself into a nearby chair. Ranger settled beside her. For several minutes, she turned through the documents in silence. Every page revealed another piece of a life she never knew existed. Tax records, maintenance logs, letters from attorneys, notes written by Thomas himself. The ranch had never been abandoned. Someone had quietly maintained it for decades. Then Logan noticed another folder beneath the deed. Unlike the others, this one carried a red tab. He pulled it free and frowned. Several legal notices sat inside, more recent than the rest. Much more recent. His expression hardened as he read. Margaret noticed immediately. "What is it?" Logan hesitated, then handed her the papers. The color slowly drained from her face. Several names appeared throughout the documents. Names she recognized. Her son, her daughter-in-law, other family members. Someone had recently filed inquiries regarding the property, not to find Margaret, to gain control of the ranch. The realization settled over the room like a heavy shadow. Margaret looked away. Pain crossed her face. "They knew," she whispered. Logan said nothing. He did not need to. The dates told the story clearly. While Margaret struggled alone, others had been searching for the ranch. Not for her sake, for what it was worth. Ranger suddenly stood. His ears lifted toward another section of the room. The German shepherd walked away from the table and stopped beside a tall wooden cabinet hidden in the far corner. He nudged the door with his nose. Once, then again. Logan almost laughed despite everything. "You are not finished yet, are you?" The cabinet opened with a creak. Inside sat dozens of journals stacked neatly from floor to ceiling, each one labeled with a year. Margaret rose slowly and approached. Her fingers brushed across the spines. There were so many. Decades of entries. Decades of waiting. Then one journal slipped free and fell open on the floor. A folded photograph slid out and landed at Logan's feet. He picked it up. The image showed Thomas standing in front of the ranch house beside a young German shepherd. On the back, written in faded ink, was a short note. Logan read it aloud. "If Margaret ever finds her way home, tell her the ranch was never the treasure she was." The room went silent. Margaret covered her mouth. Tears streamed freely down her face. And beside her, Ranger gently leaned against her shoulder as though he had finally uncovered the truth he had been searching for all along. For several minutes, Margaret Whitmore could not speak. She sat in the old wooden chair beneath the ranch, holding the photograph against her chest while tears slipped silently down her face. The underground room felt warmer now despite the cold stone walls surrounding them. The truth had changed everything. All those years she had believed Thomas Whitaker eventually forgot her. Life had moved on. Time had erased what they once shared. Yet every document, every letter, every photograph told a different story. He had remembered. He had waited. He had built an entire future around the possibility that one day she might return. Ranger remained beside her, his head resting gently against her leg. The German shepherd's steady presence felt almost comforting, as though he understood that some discoveries required silence. Logan Hayes moved slowly through the room, examining the shelves and journals. The deeper he looked, the more extraordinary the story became. Decades of records filled the hidden archive. Maintenance receipts, ranch inventories, personal journals, correspondence with attorneys. Every year carefully documented. Then one particular ledger caught his attention. Unlike the others, it appeared much newer. The cover showed signs of recent handling. Logan opened it and frowned. Several entries had been made within the last 5 years. That was impossible. Thomas had been gone much longer than that. Margaret, Logan said quietly. I think someone has been here. She looked up immediately. Logan handed her the ledger. Several names appeared throughout the pages. Contractors, property managers, legal representatives. Yet one name repeated more often than the others. Charles Denton. Margaret stared at it. The name meant nothing to her. But Ranger suddenly stood. His ears lifted. The dog walked toward another shelf and nudged a metal lockbox hidden behind a stack of journals. Logan retrieved it and carefully opened the latch. Inside were more recent documents. Some were legal notices. Others were financial statements. Then Logan discovered a thick envelope marked confidential. He removed the papers and immediately felt his pulse quicken. These were not old records. They were active court filings. Property claims. Ownership disputes. Someone had been trying to gain control of Willow Creek Ranch for years. The same name appeared again and again. Charles Denton. Logan continued reading. His expression darkened. This man has been fighting to obtain the ranch through the courts. Margaret frowned. Who is he? Logan reached the final page. Then he froze. The answer sat directly in front of him. Charles Denton was not a stranger. He was connected to Margaret's family. Distantly. Quietly. Legally. The realization settled heavily across the room. While Thomas spent decades protecting the ranch for Margaret, someone else had spent years trying to take it away before she could ever find it. Snow rattled softly against the ground above them. The storm continued outside, but another storm had begun inside the hidden archive. Logan read further. Charles had repeatedly claimed Margaret could not be located, that there were no surviving beneficiaries, that the property should be transferred to new ownership. Yet someone had blocked every attempt. Every single one. Margaret looked toward the shelves filled with journals. Thomas, she whispered. Logan shook his head slowly. Not Thomas. He turned another page. A signature appeared at the bottom. An attorney named Eleanor Graves. The woman had spent nearly 20 years defending Margaret's legal claim without ever meeting her. Ranger moved closer as Logan read the final note attached to the file. The message was short. If Margaret Whitmore is ever found, contact immediately. The truth belongs to her. Silence filled the room once again. Then, from somewhere above the ranch, a faint sound echoed through the storm. A vehicle engine. Logan looked up immediately. Ranger's ears snapped forward. The German Shepherd moved toward the staircase. Someone had just arrived at Willow Creek Ranch. The sound came again. Faint, distant, yet unmistakable. An engine climbing the narrow road toward Willow Creek Ranch. Logan Hayes immediately closed the folder and slipped the documents back into the lockbox. Ranger stood at the bottom of the staircase, every muscle alert. The German Shepherd was not frightened. He was focused. Above them, wind pushed snow against the old barn and rattled loose boards across the property. Margaret Whitmore remained seated beside the table, clutching Thomas's photograph against her chest. The discovery of the hidden archive had already changed her life. Now it seemed something else was about to happen. Logan moved toward the stairs and listened carefully. One vehicle, maybe a pickup truck. The engine struggled briefly against the steep incline before finally stopping somewhere near the house. Silence followed. Ranger's ears remained fixed upward. Then came the sound of a car door closing. Margaret slowly stood. Do you think it is him? She asked quietly. Logan looked back. Charles Denton. She nodded. Logan considered the possibility. Whoever had spent years trying to gain control of the ranch would certainly be interested if someone suddenly appeared on the property, especially during a snowstorm, especially after decades of legal disputes. Ranger climbed the stairs first. Logan followed close behind. The cold air hit them immediately as they emerged inside the old barn. Snow swirled through gaps in the wooden walls. The fading daylight had turned the ranch into a landscape of blue shadows and drifting white. Logan carefully approached a side window and looked out. A dark pickup truck sat parked near the front porch of the ranch house. One figure stood beside it. An older woman wearing a long winter coat. Not Charles Denton. Not a stranger looking for property. Just one woman standing alone in the snow. Logan frowned. That is unexpected. Margaret joined him at the window. The moment she saw the woman, her eyes widened. "No," she whispered. Logan turned. "You know her?" Tears immediately appeared in Margaret's eyes. "Eleanor." The name hung in the air. Logan looked back toward the truck. The woman appeared to be in her 70s. Silver hair. Small frame. She held a folder tightly against her chest while staring toward the ranch house. Then she noticed movement in the barn window. For a moment she froze. Margaret did too. 50 years of missed opportunities. 50 years of waiting. 50 years of silence. Then Margaret started walking. Logan opened the barn door and followed her into the snow. Ranger trotted beside them. The wind carried flakes across the ranch yard as the two elderly women approached one another. Neither spoke at first. They simply stared. Finally, Eleanor Graves smiled through tears. "I was beginning to think I would never find you." Margaret's hand rose to her mouth. "You are the lawyer." Eleanor nodded. "Thomas hired me a long time ago." The words seemed to take all the strength from Margaret's legs. Logan quickly moved closer, but Margaret steadied herself. Eleanor stepped forward and gently took her hands. "Every year he asked the same question," she said softly. "Have you found her yet?" Margaret closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "He never stopped?" Eleanor shook her head. "Never." Snow settled across their coats. Ranger sat quietly nearby, watching. Logan felt as though he were witnessing something sacred. Eleanor opened the folder she carried. Inside were additional documents, photographs, and legal records. "I came because someone filed another claim against the ranch last week," she explained. "When I heard there had been activity on the property, I drove here immediately." Her eyes moved toward Margaret. "I hoped it might finally be you." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ranger suddenly stood and walked toward the porch of the ranch house. The German shepherd stopped near the front steps and looked back at them. Once. Twice. Then he sat down beside the old wooden door as if waiting for someone to open it. Eleanor noticed first. "That dog has remarkable instincts." Logan smiled faintly. "You have no idea." And somewhere behind that weathered ranch door, another piece of Thomas Whitaker's story was still waiting to be found. The old ranch house stood quietly beneath the falling snow, its weathered porch illuminated by the fading glow of evening. Wind swept across the valley and carried loose flakes against the windows, but Ranger remained seated at the front steps, as though guarding a secret. Logan Hayes had learned to trust that look. Whenever the German shepherd became this focused, something important was waiting nearby. Margaret Whitmore climbed the porch slowly. Every step seemed heavier than the last. 50 years of memories surrounded her now. The ranch, the letters, the hidden room, Thomas's promise. It all felt impossible. Yet here she was. Eleanor Graves followed close behind, holding the folder against her chest. The elderly attorney looked at the old house with a mixture of sadness and relief. "I have visited this place dozens of times," she said quietly. "Every year I hoped I would bring you with me." Margaret smiled through tears. "And every year I was somewhere else." Logan reached the front door and tested the handle. To his surprise, it opened immediately. The hinges groaned softly. Cold air drifted from inside. Ranger stood and entered first. The beam from Logan's flashlight swept across the interior. Dust covered most surfaces, yet the house did not feel abandoned. Furniture remained neatly arranged. Books rested on shelves. A firewood rack sat beside the stone fireplace. It looked as though someone had stepped out only yesterday and planned to return. Margaret slowly crossed the threshold. Her eyes moved from room to room. Every object seemed to carry a memory. Then she stopped. Resting on the mantel above the fireplace stood a framed photograph. Thomas Whitaker smiled back at her from across the years. Margaret's breath caught. She approached carefully and picked up the frame. A handwritten note rested behind the glass. "Welcome home, Margaret." The room went silent. Eleanor quietly wiped away tears. Logan looked away, giving her privacy. Even Ranger seemed unusually gentle. The German shepherd lay down near the fireplace and watched. Margaret placed the photograph back on the mantel and noticed something else. Beside it sat a small velvet box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside rested a simple engagement ring. The same ring Thomas had once given her more than 50 years ago. For a moment she could not breathe. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. Eleanor looked over her shoulder. "He kept it all this time." Margaret carefully lifted the ring. Memories flooded back. Summer evenings. Long walks. Promises whispered beneath Montana sunsets. Dreams of a future they never had. Or so she thought. Then, Ranger suddenly stood. His ears lifted toward a writing desk near the far wall. The German shepherd crossed the room and nudged the lowest drawer with his nose. Logan smiled faintly. Of course there is one more thing. He opened the drawer. Inside lay a thick leather journal. Unlike the others they had found below the barn, this one appeared to be Thomas's personal diary. A folded envelope rested on top. Margaret's name was written across the front. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter inside was dated only 6 months before Thomas passed away. She began reading silently. Tears appeared almost immediately. Logan watched her expression change from sadness to disbelief. Finally, Margaret lowered the page. He found me. Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? Margaret handed her the letter. Eleanor read the first lines and gasped softly. Years earlier, Thomas had discovered where Margaret was living. He had learned about her marriage, her children, her life. He had even driven past her house several times. Yet he never approached. Not because he stopped loving her. Because he believed she had found happiness without him. Margaret closed her eyes. The realization broke her heart and healed it at the same time. They had spent decades separated by a misunderstanding neither one ever knew how to correct. Then Logan turned another page of the journal. A folded legal document slipped free and landed on the floor. He picked it up and immediately froze. Charles Denton's name appeared at the top, along with something none of them expected. Charles was not trying to steal the ranch alone. Someone inside Margaret's own family had been helping him. For several seconds, no one spoke. The crackling of the fireplace and the soft hiss of snow against the windows became the only sounds inside the old ranch house. Logan Hayes stared at the document in his hands. Margaret Whitmore watched him anxiously. Eleanor Graves stepped closer, her face pale beneath the warm light. Ranger stood beside the desk, ears raised, sensing the tension without understanding the words. Logan slowly lowered the page. Margaret, he said carefully, I think you should sit down. The elderly woman did not move. Something in his voice told her this was not simply another legal record. This was something personal, something painful. Tell me, she said quietly. Logan glanced toward Eleanor. The attorney reached for the document and read it herself. Her expression hardened immediately. I cannot believe this. Margaret's heart sank. What is it? Eleanor looked up slowly. Your son signed these papers. The room seemed to tilt around her. For a moment Margaret thought she had misheard. My son. Eleanor nodded. Charles Denton was not acting alone. Your son provided information about your location, your finances, and your legal status. Together they were attempting to prove that you had no valid claim to this ranch. Margaret stared at her. The words felt impossible. Her son, the boy she raised, the child she stayed awake with during fevers, the young man she defended through every mistake. The same son who had recently told her there was no room left for her in his home. She lowered herself into a chair without realizing she had moved. Tears filled her eyes again. Not because of the ranch. Not because of the inheritance itself. Because the truth hurt more than either of those things. Ranger immediately crossed the room and rested his head on her lap. Margaret wrapped trembling fingers into his fur. Logan felt anger rise inside him. Not the reckless anger of youth. The quiet anger that came from witnessing injustice. He looked back at the document. Multiple signatures. Multiple attempts. Years of effort. While Thomas spent decades protecting Margaret's future, others had spent years trying to erase it. Eleanor continued reading. There is more. Logan frowned. More? She nodded. These filings were rejected repeatedly because Thomas left very specific instructions. Every attorney involved was required to continue searching for Margaret no matter how long it took. Margaret closed her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains. The storm outside had deepened. Snow covered the ranch in white silence. Yet inside the old house, another truth was finally coming into the light. Eleanor turned to the final page. Her eyes widened slightly. This changes everything. Logan stepped closer. Attached to the filing was a handwritten statement from Thomas himself. The date was only a few months before his death. His words were simple. If Margaret is ever found, no challenge to her ownership shall be recognized. The ranch belongs to her completely. No court, no relative, no claimant may take it away. Margaret covered her mouth. Thomas had thought of everything. Even decades after they were separated, he had continued protecting her. Ranger suddenly stood and walked toward the window. The German Shepherd stared outside into the snow-covered darkness. Then he released a soft bark. Logan followed his gaze. Headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway. Another vehicle was approaching the ranch. Slowly, deliberately. Eleanor looked through the glass and immediately recognized it. Her expression changed. That is Charles Denton. Silence filled the room. Margaret tightened her grip on the photograph resting beside her. Logan moved toward the front door. Ranger remained at his side. The storm swirled around the approaching truck as it rolled closer to the house. After 50 years of waiting, 50 years of secrets, and 50 years of unanswered questions, the man who wanted the ranch had finally arrived. The truck rolled slowly through the falling snow and came to a stop in front of the ranch house. Its headlights cut through the storm, casting long shadows across the porch and frozen yard. Inside the house, nobody spoke. Margaret Whitmore sat quietly in the chair near the fireplace, the old photograph pressed against her chest. Eleanor Graves stood beside the window. Logan Hayes remained near the front door. Ranger sat at his side, alert but calm. The German Shepherd's eyes never left the truck outside. Finally, the driver's door opened. A man stepped into the storm. He looked older than Margaret expected. Thinner, too. The years had left their mark on him. Charles Denton pulled his coat tighter against the wind and slowly approached the porch. There was no anger in his movements. No confidence either. Only weariness. Logan opened the door before he reached it. Snow swirled inside briefly before the door. Closed again. Charles removed his hat and looked around the room. His eyes landed on Margaret. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then he lowered his gaze. I never thought I would actually find you here. Margaret studied him carefully. The man who had spent years trying to claim the ranch did not look like the villain she had imagined. He looked tired, regretful, human. Eleanor stepped forward immediately. You should not be here. Charles nodded. I know. His voice was quiet. But after what happened this week, I could not stay away. Logan folded his arms. What happened? Charles looked toward the fire. The orange light reflected across his face. Your son confessed. Silence filled the room. Margaret felt her breath catch. Charles continued. When he learned the legal search had finally located you, he contacted me. He told me everything. Eleanor frowned. Everything. Charles nodded. The paperwork. The false statements. The attempts to keep Margaret from ever learning about the ranch. His shoulders sagged. I spent years believing I was helping settle an abandoned estate. I did not know the truth. Margaret closed her eyes. The pain was still there. Yet something about Charles's voice felt sincere. Logan noticed it too. Ranger remained still beside him. If the dog sensed danger, he showed none of it. Charles slowly removed a folder from inside his coat. I brought these. Eleanor accepted it carefully. Inside were signed withdrawal notices, legal reversals, and official statements. Every claim against the ranch had been surrendered. Every challenge withdrawn. The documents were complete. Final. Eleanor looked up in surprise. You signed all of this? Charles nodded. The ranch belongs to Margaret. It always did. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. Not because of the property. Not because of the money. Because after decades of confusion and secrecy, someone had finally chosen honesty. Charles looked toward her. I am sorry. The words were simple, yet they carried genuine weight. Margaret studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Thank you for telling the truth. The storm continued outside. But inside the house, something had changed. The fight was over. The documents hidden beneath the ranch, the years of waiting, the promises Thomas left behind, all of it had finally reached the same conclusion. Justice had arrived quietly. Not through revenge. Through truth. Ranger suddenly stood and walked toward the fireplace. The German Shepherd stopped beside a small wooden chest Logan had not noticed before. He nudged it gently with his nose. Once. Then again. Logan smiled faintly. Apparently, we are not finished yet. He opened the chest. Inside rested one final envelope. The paper was old. The handwriting familiar. Thomas Whitaker. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was short. Very short. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then somehow life has been kinder than I ever dared hope. The ranch was never meant to make you wealthy. It was meant to bring you home. And for the first time that evening, Margaret smiled without sadness. Spring arrived slowly in the Montana hills. Snow retreated from the valleys. The creek beside the ranch began flowing again. Green returned to the pastures where winter had ruled for months. For Margaret Whitmore, Every sunrise felt different now. The loneliness that had followed her for so many years no longer greeted her each morning. Instead, she woke to birdsong outside the porch, fresh coffee in the kitchen, and the sight of Ranger stretched across the floor as though he had always belonged there. Months passed. Lawyers completed paperwork. Property records were corrected. Thomas Whitaker's final wishes were honored exactly as he intended. The ranch officially belonged to Margaret. Yet the documents mattered less to her than the feeling that settled over the land itself. For the first time in half a century, she was no longer searching for where she belonged. She had finally found it. Logan Hayes remained part of that new chapter. At first, he stayed only to help repair the property. Then he stayed because leaving felt wrong. Together, they rebuilt fences, cleared old trails, repaired the barn roof, and restored forgotten corners of the ranch. Ranger supervised every project with the quiet seriousness only a German shepherd could manage. Wherever Margaret walked, Ranger followed. Wherever she sat, he settled nearby. The bond between them grew naturally, as though both had spent years waiting for the other. One warm evening near the end of summer, Margaret sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky glowed gold, amber, and deep crimson. Ranger rested beside her rocking chair. Logan leaned against the railing with a cup of coffee in his hands. The ranch looked alive again. Wildflowers swayed in the fields. Horses grazed peacefully beyond the fence. Lights glowed warmly from the restored barn. Margaret smiled as she looked across the property. Thomas would have loved this. Logan nodded. I think he knew it would happen. Margaret looked down at the old engagement ring she now wore on a chain around her neck. For years I thought life had forgotten me. Her voice was soft, thoughtful. Turns out I was wrong. Ranger lifted his head and looked at her. Margaret laughed quietly and scratched behind his ears. You knew before I did, didn't you? The German shepherd wagged his tail once. Logan smiled. That dog has been right about everything since the day I met him. Silence settled over the porch. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. The kind shared by people who no longer need to explain themselves. Margaret watched the last light spill across the valley. She thought about the highway. The cold, the suitcase, the moment she believed her story was ending. Then she thought about the hidden ranch, the letters, the photographs, the love that had waited 50 years to find its way back to her. Most of all, she thought about the German shepherd who refused to walk away from a lonely old woman sitting beside the road. Without Ranger, none of it would have happened. The hidden room would have remained hidden. The truth would have stayed buried. The ranch would never have become home again. As darkness settled gently over Willow Creek, Margaret reached down and rested her hand on Ranger's head. The dog closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. Somewhere beyond the hills, a cool evening breeze moved through the pines. The world continued turning. Seasons would continue changing. Years would continue passing. But some things were stronger than time itself. Loyalty was stronger than time. Love was stronger than time. And sometimes, when all hope seemed lost, the road home began with a single dog who chose not to leave.